Peace. God's peace be upon you. Thank you so much for joining me again today here at the Reimagined Schools, where we are changing the way we educate. And we change the way we educate by redefining and redesigning urban education with parents as central figures, as community and school advocates. Parents, we want you to become well voiced in all things school so that you can be the best advocate for the children in our community to make sure that they are getting the excellent education that they deserve and that they will need in order to compete with other people in the world. So if you've been following the news and commentary since the Parkland, Florida shooting, you know that there's been a lot of discussion about what do we do now. There has been discussion and conversation about arming teachers. There has been discussion about adding more school resource officers, police officers, which is what school resource officers are, into our schools. So I kind of want to talk about that today. I did give you in a previous blog, and if you haven't seen my blog, please go to the reimagineschools.com where you'll be able to keep up with the issues in education that I've been discussing. I did a blog about why teachers should not be armed. And the interesting thing is, after I wrote that blog, which was inspired by a teacher in, I forget what state he was in now, but he locked himself into a classroom and let off a gunshot. No students were hurt. There was a student hurt running away, but no one was hurt in that incident. And I was discussing that was the reason why we should not have armed teachers, because it could really be potentially dangerous. Probably about 2 weeks after I wrote that blog, we had the incident with the trained police officer. I think he was some kind of law enforcement officer who was teaching students how to, I want to say, something to do with firearms. He was teaching his class and he left a bullet in the chamber and it shot into the ceiling and created all this chaos. But more than creating chaos, it created more conversation as to why teachers should not be armed, because this individual was a trained person with firearms, and that incident still took place. There was a student who was hurt from debris falling from the ceiling on top of him. So again, another reason why teachers should not be armed. What I want to talk to you today, though, about is about the idea of having more police officers in school and whether or not that's going to make schools safer. Now, I spent the greater part of my career in education working in a small urban district where seeing security and police officers and was the norm. It just became part of the routine, part of the process. And I often thought about and reflected on, what it must be like to attend school where the first thing you do when you come in the morning is not get the, welcome to school. We're so glad to see you today. Greeting, but you're greeted by security and wands, and you have to go through security, and your bag has to be checked, and you have to be checked. And that was just a regular part of the process. So I kind of have a personal insight, if you will, on the idea of more police officers in school. And again, if you're following my blog at the Reimagined Schools, then you'll know that I also wrote a blog titled What Happened to Lucky? Lucky being a fictional name, where I tie together why I don't believe that we need more police officers in our schools. So we're going to kind of, tie these points together. Now, what has recently happened is that there was a congressional hearing, if you will, where there were experts who were brought together to discuss about arming teachers. It was actually a Senate Judiciary Committee on arming teachers, and that video is available online for you to see. I think you probably simply can do a search for it. That there was a Senate Judiciary Committee on arming teachers, where there was a discussion about school resource officers, also known as SRO. So if you hear me say SRO, I'm referring to school resource officers. So the conversation is, in the news, of course, because of all the school shootings that we've had the one in Parkland being, such a great tragedy that people are trying to consider what to do. So as we continue to discuss school shootings and what to do about it, the conversation is going to continue to return to more police officers on our school campuses. Now, Attorney General Jeff Sessions just revealed as part of the White House plan that he believes that we need more school resource officers. And while this will give the appearance of more safety, it certainly looks like it might be more safe when you have more police officers on campus. There's more concern about the impact that more officers will have on Black and Latino students. Now, that's an important point to make, because people think that placing police officers at a school is certain to make the school safer. I think even I read an article where Shaquille O'Neal was quoted as saying that he wanted officers in front of the school and back of the school, on the side of the school. In other words, he wanted more officers in schools, and I had to disagree with him, as I disagree with people who think that simply placing police officers in a position in a school is going to make the school safer. I don't know that that is the case. Certainly, if we look over the history of school shootings, unfortunately, we have a history of school shootings where the first school resource officers really started, becoming a factor in schools around or after the Columbine High School shooting and the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. And at that point, we had a multiple number of school resource officers begin to be stationed in schools. In 2013, after the Sandy Hook shooting, President Barack Obama put millions of dollars in grant funding under the Community-Oriented Policing Services, which was used to hire, school resource officers to increase their ranks in schools, as well as school counselors and school psychologists. Between 1997 and 2014, the percentage of school resource officers in public schools increased from 17% in 1997 to about 30% in 2014. Okay. Now, currently, we have about 24% of elementary schools in the country having school resource officers and 42% at high schools. Now, if we think about the fact that after Columbine took place, that we had this increase in school resource officers, we also should recognize that we have had an increase in school shootings. So if one were considering whether or not the police presence in the school will reduce school violence, then that's obviously a no, because we know that the Parkland, Florida school shooting, I believe it was supposed to have been the 18th school shooting in 2018 alone. Of course, we know we've had school shootings in the past, so it doesn't appear that having police officers on campus reduces school violence, because we know that school violence, namely mass shootings, has increased as a result. So that would be one reason why I would not be necessarily for school resource officers, because I don't think their presence is going to, or has, I should say, delayed any mass school shootings. The other thing that I think about is a lot of times what I realize in education is when we put so much emphasis on a thing for students that then becomes the thing that they're doing. So if we tell students, for example, we don't want you to bring your video games to school, and we constantly are talking about video games, and every moment that we have, we are discussing why we should not have video games in school. Do you think that that is going to make students not bring video games to school, or is it somehow unconsciously really promoting them to do and bring video games to school? In other words, if we are constantly focusing on all of the trauma and drama around school shootings and school resource officers and ALICE training and what we're going to do in the case of emergency, it could be having an adverse reaction in that this is creating the environment for these type of terrible incidents, because we're putting so much emphasis on it. Now that's a catch-22, because we have to discuss it. We have to actually put some things into place that will help to begin to decrease and at some point stop these type of interactions. But we have to consider whether or not the emphasis that we're putting on these tragedies is increasing these tragedies. I mean, just a few days ago, there was another shooting in Maryland. So it seems like this is the go-to thing to do, for people who are obviously troubled. Okay. Another point that needs to be considered when we're talking about adding more officers to schools is how will our Black and Latino students feel about adding more officers to school. And you may say, well, why would we just look at them specifically? Well, we have to look at them specifically because we know that the research is very clear from the Department of Education. It's very clear in the civil rights data that Black students in particular are 2.2 times more likely to be referred to law enforcement or arrested at school than white students. So that's something to be concerned about. And it is such a concern that many civil rights groups are worried that more police presence will result in increased unfair treatment of Black and Latino students, and particularly Black students, including more arrests and charges that will result in Black students entering the criminal justice system. You've often heard me and others talk about the school to prison pipeline, which is a very real thing. And when we have an officer's presence on campus, ultimately it becomes a burden on your Black students who are more likely to be engaged with those police officers while they're on campus. They're in school, but they're engaging with police, and ultimately it's more likely that they will, be arrested and end up on some kind of charges that will enter them into the criminal justice system. And we're actually trying to move away from that. So it may not be something that Black students are going to be excited to see more police and more police presence in their schools. Because let's just be honest here, because that's what we have to be if we're really going to begin to change and solve some of the problems that we have in our educational system and in our society. Because remember that the school is just a microcosm of society. It's a little society, and whatever is going on in the larger society is going on inside of our schools. Okay. Now it is hard for some people to accept that Black people are often unfairly targeted by police officers. For many years, people denied it, and there are people who still deny it. But with the strong presence of social media, we know that. We've seen it. We've seen it with our own eyes. We've seen the comments, all over social media after events take place. And many people have expressed concern, in particular, in this instance of our discussion, about inviting more police into our urban schools. The idea of more heavy-handed tactics and police engagement is not the answer, in my opinion, and I think in some other people's. And what do I mean by that? I want to tell you a story about a student named Lucky. Now, Lucky is a fictional name, but Lucky was one of my students. He was a fantastic human being. He was funny. He had a gentle spirit. He was ambitious and had positive and productive goals for his life that he worked towards every day. He was very intelligent, and he worked hard to maintain his high GPA. Lucky was an African American, a Black student of mine, and I loved him so much. I still do. He was in the baddest band in the land, and he traveled all over the country and even internationally with his band. He was a positive role model and always had a smile on his face. He was a great person to be around for all who encountered him, and that included me. I really enjoyed his presence, as did everyone else. He was just an outstanding person, okay? And I give you that backdrop because I'm going to tell you about what happened to Lucky, okay? Now, one day we were starting class and he wasn't present. And it was not like Lucky not to be in class on time. He was always on time. He was always present. The only time that he wasn't present was when he was on a band trip. So I noticed right away because he never missed school. Okay. Again, there was no band trip. So I just, kind of was like, okay, where's Lucky? He's never late to class. He's always usually early. He comes up early to sit and talk with me before school even starts. The class starts, that is. So I kept my eye on the clock, hoping that he was just running late. You know, it happens. And we went on with the lesson. About 25 minutes into the lesson, Lucky came into the classroom. I knew something was wrong right away. He didn't look like himself. He wasn't acting like himself. He always had a smile on his face. He was always pleasant. But in this case, he was withdrawn and he seemed like he was frightened. I stopped the lesson. Yes, I did. I stopped the lesson because that's what a concerned human being would do. A concerned teacher who knows her student and knows that there's something wrong. I stopped the lesson. Okay. I asked him what was wrong, and he had tears in his eyes, and which made me have tears in my eyes, and all of the other students in the classroom. We all became tearful, and we didn't know why, but we knew something happened to him because he wasn't acting like himself. Because this is our Lucky. We know him. Okay, he brought so much joy to us. We knew something was wrong with him, and it troubled us. So what happened to him? He started telling us about how he was walking to school when a police officer and his police car pulled up beside him. The officer, and I use the term lightly, okay, it's in quotation marks, if you will. The officer got out of his car, he grabbed Lucky, and he threw him up against the car, and he started roughing him up, hitting him and yelling at him. Now, Lucky was scared because he hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't a criminal. He had never engaged in the criminal justice system. He was a law-abiding citizen, just an excellent human being. That's what I referred to him as because that's what he was. He never did anything wrong that would cause the police to accost him, to stop him. Nothing like that ever happened to him. So he's here scared to death because he doesn't know what's going on. He hasn't done anything wrong, but he knows enough not to try to fight the police back. He knew that because all black boys know that. And I use the term boy loosely. I'm referring to black males. Okay. Not that they're boys, but he was a boy to me. He was like my son. So please understand that. Now he kept on telling this officer that he was 16 years old and he was an honors student. He kept telling them that I'm on my way to school. I'm just trying to get to school. The officer, again in quotation marks, used very loosely, demanded that he show him some identification. So Lucky showed him his student badge. And only when he saw the student badge did he stop beating him up and harassing him. The officer didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge that he was wrong for anything that he did. He just got in his car. He said to Lucky on his way to his car, I thought you was somebody else. And he got in his car and pulled off. I just want you to let that sink in for a minute. Because even now, telling this story all these years later, it really bothers me because it's disturbing. So here's Lucky on the street. He doesn't know what just happened to him, except that he was a black male walking down the street. Now he's got to get himself together, pull himself back together, get his dress code back in place because he's, been beaten by the police officer. And now he's got to get his mind right to go to school. Really? Can you imagine? Can you only just imagine just a little drop of what that must have felt like? So here's Lucky telling us this story. And we being myself and my students, we are so upset about this situation in class. How can I go forward and teach a lesson? I can't, because listen to the lesson that he was taught, okay? Now, Lucky had a full beard. He was 16 years old, but he had a full beard, so he looked a lot older than most 16-year-olds, most males his age. And so here he is saying, well, maybe he thought I was an adult because I had this beard. And I'm saying to him, it doesn't matter if you were the person that he thought you were. It doesn't make a difference if you have a beard, if you don't have a beard. There's no justification for how he treated you. Even if he was really looking for someone, which I doubt, he was just harassing him. Even if he was looking for someone else, this was not the way he was supposed to receive that person. He harassed you. He mistreated you and he abused his power. And so I was trying to, make sure that he understood that this wasn't your fault. So what? You're 16 years old with a full beard. There's no excuse for what just happened to you. Okay. Now, I told Lucky again that he hadn't done anything wrong, that there was no excuse for how the officer treated him, and that type of behavior was probably that officer's MO, and meaning, that's how he operates all the time. And again, even if he actually thought that he was someone else, he still shouldn't have treated him like that, or that person. Of course, I was angry and upset about what happened to Lucky, because I had long heard about how the police treated people in this community. I had heard from previous students about how they just harassed walking down the street from the police. I had heard stories about all the mistreatment that took place in this community, but up until that point, it was just a story. I didn't have, verifiable proof, if you will, but until Lucky. It's not that I didn't believe the people in the community. Of course I did. There would be no reason for mass amounts of people in the community to have negative comments about the police and how they treated the citizens. So I believed it, but this was like in my face. It was there. Here was someone who I was tied directly to, who I was close to, who had been mistreated, and it made me really angry. It still makes me angry now. This was some years ago. Okay. The police had a terrible, very terrible reputation for mistreating the people, especially black males in this community. Now, again, on that day, it was no longer a rumor, because the look in Lucky's eyes and his demeanor, spoke volumes of pain, anger, and injustice. It was not something that anyone could deny looking at him, that he made it up. He wasn't that type of person. This happened to him. Now, Lucky didn't want to make a complaint because he knew that if he made a complaint, he would become a target. See, because in order to make a complaint, he was going to have to go to the police department in this community, where multiple people in the community spoke about how they were being mistreated by the police. So there was no way he was going to go and make a complaint, because he didn't want to be a target. And as much as I wanted to be able to say otherwise, I knew he was right. And this police department was notorious for bad behavior. And many of their officers in subsequent years had been charged with corruption and arrested after a federal sting. In fact, it was several federal stings it was one federal sting, and then there were other cases where this particular police department had so many people who were guilty of corruption. Just to give you a background of this particular community. And it may be an exception in this community, or it may not be. I don't know. I just want to give you my take and why I feel the way I feel. Okay. Some of the officers, I have to say this because in fairness and in truth, I have to tell you that some of these officers on this police department were great. They were law-abiding. They were good people. They wanted to be productive members of the community. I got to know some of them over the years, and they were great people. But unfortunately, these good officers were overshadowed by those bad apples. It was just too many bad apples. And that police department, even to this day, has never really been able to recover their reputation or otherwise, because of so much corruption that took place from the top down to the bottom. Okay. So if you understand that school resource officers are drawn from the police departments in the school community. Let me say that again. School resource officers are drawn from police departments in the school community. They don't go outside. They stay within the school community. So if you understand that, and if you understand what happened to Lucky, and given the background of the police department in his community, are you still going to tell me that you're for more police in schools? Are you going to tell me that you can't understand why many people, many civil rights activists are concerned about increasing the police presence in schools and urban communities where there are black students who are 2.2 times more likely to be arrested by police? Are you going to tell me that you don't understand that? If you think about Lucky, who did absolutely nothing, I have to say, I have a no response on this issue. I do not believe that we need more police officers in our schools. I worked in this community where students again went through security every day before they entered school. I can still see security wands, radios, handcuffs, and uniforms in my memories. Those are huge parts of my memories, and I wish that they weren't, because I'm used to seeing that at the airport. Or if I'm going to, a venue, a sporting event where they have, security to check people before they get in. I'm not accustomed to that. And I never really got accustomed to seeing that in school. It was just it wasn't, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a contrast. Like, we're in school, we're supposed to be learning, but this looks like a little jail. It looks like a prison, because we didn't just have security officers, because we had plenty of those throughout the district, but we had so many officers on our campus. And I was working in secondary education, which would be 6 through 12. Particularly at our high school, there was so many officers. It was just like, this is like a little police department. That's how I felt. I felt like the school environment was a mini police department. Okay. It's not something that anyone would want to see or hope to see in school. I often wonder what that environment did to the psyche of students, because it was hard to see and experience on a daily basis for me. So I can't imagine what it was like to go through security every single day when you came to school. I can't imagine what it's like to, every time you walk down a hallway, you see police officers. In the cafeteria, you see police officers. After school, you see police officers. On your way home, you see police officers. You're surrounded by the police. I often wonder what that environment did and does to the psyche of students, because it's still something that continues in urban school districts. I can't speak for what that presence, or if such a presence occurs in mostly white school districts. I can only talk about where I've worked, and I've mostly worked in I've only worked in urban school districts that were predominantly Black student populated. And not in every instance, but in one district that I spent most of my career in, that is something that is etched into my memory forever. Okay. So please know that there are many Luckies all over the country, and police officers like the one who mistreated him. And now we have to ask ourselves, are we really willing to potentially invite this type of abuse of power and injustice in our schools to target our students? I'm not willing to take that chance. So I'm going to say, no, I don't think we need more police officers in schools. But I would like to know, what do you think? Please leave your comments below. Like, subscribe, hit the notification button so you'll know whenever I release a new video. And most importantly, I would like for you to share this information. This is how we empower one another, by sharing information. If you would share what your favorite celebrity did, or what they said, or what they had on, which so many people are consumed with, you should be more consumed with what's happening in your everyday life, because those are the things that are most important. And certainly our children, their environment where they're being educated, the quality of their education, their ability to compete in the future, to have a future, that's more important than anything any celebrity said, did, what picture they wrote. Okay, that's not important. Sorry if you thought it was. It's not. Okay, tell me what you think. Thank you. I hope that this information was helpful to you. If you would like further information on what I do at the Reimagine Schools, please join me. Take a look at the reimagineschools.com. You can also subscribe and follow on my social media accounts on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Okay, thank you. Peace. God's peace be upon you. And remember, you are obligated to keep the peace.